So that's the esteemed panel for you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just introduce the topic to you now. You know, we've talked about 5G. Obviously, the fact is that 5G cannot happen without automated networks. And as 5G loads start bringing into the network congestion, it's going to be extremely important how we automate these networks so that this doesn't have to be physically switched, changed, modified, optimized, depending on the need. So with greater bandwidth, faster speeds, and lower latency, the 5G network is working as a channel that is uniting telecom network engineering and operations with IT, which is an integral part. A single 5G network may serve different genre of customers and markets due to the network slicing, data-driven operations, and machine-to-machine connectivity. Network automation has become a necessity with modern-day workloads, which will only increase as 5G has gone live yesterday, thanks to the PM's inauguration. Network automation is required to manage the complexities of modern dynamic networks and to orchestrate services in an efficient and effective manner. Through SDN and NFV, organizations are moving away from hardware-centric architecture. I think that's really the key. You know, we are moving away from hardware-centric architectures to more decentralized, software-centric architectures that enables dynamic, programmatically efficient network configuration. The end goal of network automation is to create a zero-touch, or what we call an autonomous network. The current network automation being undertaken is aimed at reduction of human errors in network management and operations, and also reduction of service provisioning time and improving time to cache. But are they ready to take on the 5G loads? That, I think, is going to be the most important question to ask. The panel session will discuss what are the emerging trends on automated networks, the level of maturity of the current ones, and what are the current challenges that need to be worked through to tool the architecture as the network becomes disaggregated. Now, I don't know whether all of you will stay for the next 2 hours. We have this as one part of the panel, and there's also a following panel which will discuss more or less the same topic. The header remains the same. We'll try and make it a little different, but that's where we are. So I'll just start with the question and answer round, and I'll take my place. So Mr. Gupta, can I just start with you? If you were to share some insights and perspectives on automation, and how does it help TSPs to improve customer experience? Because I think that's the key, right? That defines how the people perceive the 5G implementation and the overall quality of service in the fast evolving ecosystem. What would be your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Shobhit. First of all, good morning to all of you, and happy Gandhi Jayanta. So it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. A lot of industry colleagues we met after 2.5 years, almost 3 years. So it was very heartening to see everybody around. As far as the session is concerned, I think you gave a very good background in the context setting. What I would like to maybe dwell upon certain key aspects why network automation is becoming more important. While it was always there in the industry and people have been using for decades. With 5G launch yesterday by Honorable PM, the massive amount of data which is getting consumed is the number of transactions, the number of sites, the number of radios, and the fiber kilometer, IP routers, everything is going multifold. And with 4G launch, the per capita consumption, which used to be less than 1 GB a month, went up to 20-30 GB. Affordable pricing and the kind of OTT intervention which happened, and the video streaming plus voice quality improvement, all that which we have kind of seen in the country. What is important here that for customer experience, the operations have to be data-led and all the decisions have to be data-led. They can't be done by just OSS systems or BSS systems. The big data lakes have to play a vital role, and with disaggregation, cloudification, IPification, all that which is happening is actually bringing complexity to the network. And the scale and the speed of execution which is going to be seen in next 12 months is going to increase multifold. So what is changing? I mean, the operations which used to be kind of script driven, OSS driven, is everything converging now to AI ops, to bots, to auto correlation, zero touch, zero provisioning. Or if you are not able to achieve zero touch, there will be at least minimum touch. So what happens when you get millions of radios, millions of cells, and hundreds of millions of customers generating data? How do you analyze, correlate, and be predictive, and prevent the incidents which might impact the customer service? So the main objective of the automation has to be providing a better customer service. That's the first and foremost, the most important goal. How do you achieve it? By automated operations, by automated provisioning. These are all how part of it. But the most important thing is there is no single tool which can give you automation. It has to be capturing each and every event happening in the network, in the customer front. You capture all of them, correlate all of them, see the customer behavior, and tune your network in such a way that you are able to provide the best service. So, if you know how the networks have transformed over last 2 3 years, cloudification has brought containers into the picture, has brought virtualization into the picture. But there were bare metals already in the network. So the physical network functions, virtual network functions, and the cloud native container network functions all are going to coexist. With the coexistence of all these, it's become very, very difficult to manage at the same time. They are not going to go away at least for next few years. So one needs to learn an art and science of managing all kinds of network functions on the radio, core, transport, IP, infrastructure to provide the best customer experience. So I think this is what I feel for an operator like us who have been at the forefront of speed of execution and providing best customer experience using automation as a most important initiative across the company to provide the best service and not as an afterthought. So in 5G, I can tell you there are certain things which even the 3GPP has brought in as a part of the specification itself. If you know RIC, Radio Intelligent Controller, so there are near RIC, there are real-time RICs, but they are work in progress, I would say. At least that has been thought as a part of the specifications itself, that how do we manage interference, how do we manage various optimization techniques. If you see in 5G massive MIMO, the beam forming is a classic example of automation being built within the part of the product specification itself. Wherever the user goes, the beam follows the user. This used to be a nightmare in other technologies. So automation is being thought from the beginning of the technology being decided, so that the end user gets the best experience and the operators have highest productivity in terms of efficiency, manpower productivity, and we are able to juice the asset in such a way that we get the highest return on investment.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. I think this is the first time I've heard the audience clap in the middle of the session rather than only the end. But yes, I think what you said was very important. This is the conglomeration of so many elements coming through. It's like a shuttle launch, right? There are more than 1 million parts that are actually working together in perfect harmony for that to happen. And it's not physically possible to make sure that all elements are optimized. And therefore, there is a need to really automate that. So let me just shift from an operator's point of view to something which how will this really happen and sustain? So I'll shift over to Mr. Dey. So what are the roles of these technologies like AI and ML? I know it's very easy to just say that AI and ML will be the solution to all this, but how are they expected to play in automating the network maintenance and management? Because once you've launched, maintenance is going to be key to sustaining that thing. So what are your thoughts around that? Sorry, may I just request the audience, can you please put your phones on mute or just put the ringer off? It's very disturbing for the panelists while they're speaking for someone else to go on. And I'm sure everyone in the panel has already done that. So please, may I request? Thank you, sir.
Yes, thanks, Shobhit. And thanks, Mr. Gupta, for setting the context on automation and AI ops. I'll build on that. But first, good morning to you all and happy Gandhi Jayanti. So 5G, as you know, is very different from earlier generation of wireless technologies. For the first time, we have a technology that addresses the needs of enterprise in addition to consumers. And 5G, as you know, can support diverse use cases, in terms of enhanced mobile broadband, ultra low latency, and massive machine type communication. So this 5G therefore gives a lot of flexibility, but at the same time, maintaining and managing 5G network has very high operational complexity. So the traditional way of automation or doing things using a manual approach or script-based automation is going to be very difficult to manage and operate a 5G network. To efficiently manage and operate a 5G network, the 5G network needs to be autonomous, it needs to be cognitive, and it needs to be intent-based. So let me talk about a few things what has traditionally happened on the network, and then I will talk specifically about why AI ML driven automation, closed loop automation is needed in 5G networks. So traditionally, and many of you must have the experience of managing and operating networks. Now it turns out, studies have shown that human configuration error are the primary cause of network outages. In fact, studies have shown more than 80% of the network outages that happen globally in the world is because of human configuration error. Now, when you bring the complexity of 5G into it, where you have a lot of configuration parameters, you can imagine what will happen if you go for a manual or a script-based automation approach. Hence, it is very imperative that we use AI ML, we use big data, and we use edge computing to be able to run efficiently a 5G network. Now, let me get into some specific areas where AI ML can really help deliver closed loop automation for a 5G network. So all of you, many of you in the audience have been, may have been doing network fault prediction and network fault isolation. And the way we do it is, there are a lot of logs which have rich data in it. The logs carry a lot of information related to faults, to performance parameters, right? And by just looking at the logs, we are able to troubleshoot our network. But now, when you are talking about a 5G network, the network is very different from earlier generation of networks. There is network disaggregation, there is virtualization, there is cloud native. So to use the traditional approach of analyzing logs is not going to work in a 5G network. Hence, you need a AI ML based approach. You need to make use of techniques like knowledge graphs, NLP, to be able to better correlate the logs, to be able to better isolate and rapidly troubleshoot the network. The second case, and Mr. Gupta referred to massive MIMO. As you know, in 5G, massive MIMO is going to play a very critical role for improved coverage and capacity. But compared to traditional antennas, massive MIMO introduces a large antenna array and it introduces beamforming. So if you have to configure a massive MIMO, there are a lot of antenna parameters. And again, here, if you don't use AI ML, getting optimal placement of antennas, the right configurations is going to be very difficult. Here again, massive MIMO, AI ML will play a very important role for delivering improved user experience. Let me now touch upon another very important point is around energy. So as you know, total, if you look at globally at operators, 70% of our operators' revenue is spent on OPEX. So OPEX cost is almost equal to 65 to 70% of an operator's revenue. And if you look at the various line items on the OPEX cost, one very significant line item is energy cost. Again, if you look at the benchmark globally across operators, including in India, 8% of the OPEX cost relates to energy. Now, when you are looking at 5G because it operates at a higher frequency band, you know, if you have to leverage the benefit of 5G, network densification is a must, which means that the number of macro cells, the number of small cells will multiply by many folds. Hence, you need your network to be really energy efficient. Here again, AI ML based approach will help you to make your network much more energy efficient, to be more intelligent, so that you use power savings, right, and other measures based on the traffic need, based on user requirement. Okay. So these are, some of the factors that come to my mind where I think that, AI ML based approach is really needed to achieve and really deliver closed loop automation for 5G network. But one thing I would like to mention that AI ML based automation cannot be a standalone activity. It has to tie in with the overall transformation journey of an operator and with the overall automation journey of an operator. In fact, it is very critical for operators to be AI first and to be a data-driven enterprise. And here again, besides the technology, there are also cultural changes that are needed within an operator's organization. Human trust on AI is a very important factor. So possibly when you are introducing AI ML based automation into your network, probably initially you have to have human in the loop. And as you build confidence, you move into full scale automation based on AI ML algorithms, right? And again, as you all know, your AI ML algorithm is as good as the data. So having a data-driven enterprise where you have proper data governance, very high data quality, and most importantly, removing any bias in the data is very important. So to deliver and make use of AI ML based automation, there is also a huge organization change management needed within an operator's environment. So, thank you.
So thank you so much. I think you've also opened so many different facets that I need to touch on. Just to borrow a few, I think, this debate has now been going on in some of the circles that we are so late to the party of implementing 5G. But like Mr. Gupta and you elaborated, there are just so many elements that need to be lined up to make sure that we are ready. Obviously, it's a debatable question how much we are ready. But the fact is that there's so many elements, how much of organizational change, technical know-how, training of individuals within the operator ecosystem and the related ecosystem that need to be done, apart from educating the customer. Just one example, I'll just give this a personal example. So, some years back, I got the opportunity to actually drive a racing car on the racetrack. And for someone who's used to driving a car at 40-45 kilometers an hour on an average, is suddenly asked to do 220 kilometers on the racetrack, otherwise he has to be put on the side. You have to orient yourself. That's exactly the point. And I correlate with what Mr. Dey and Mr. Gupta was saying. There are just so many finer elements of doing something like this. You are now going to be on a racetrack. And obviously, we'll see that execution. It's been launched. We'll see the difference, and I'm sure it's going to be a perceptible difference as to how things are. Second thing you mentioned about densification of network. So for anyone who's been ruining the fact that there are so many towers on top of the buildings, please be ready for far more, not those towers, but there'll be microsites, there'll be far more in-building solutions, because just the way the physical spectrum efficiency and the physical spectrum characteristics are, right? It does not propagate through concrete. So you will need more IBS, which is in-building solutions. So there will be a lot more network now appearing for you to be able to efficiently use what the 5G network always has to offer. So thank you, Mr. Dey. I'll come back to you because there are lots of elements that one needs to touch on, but let me shift over to our international guest, Faisal, and ask about, in everything, in every CAPEX, whether it's industry agnostic, whenever it's being introduced, there's always a question mark of the commercial aspect, right? Now, we know that this technology is far more expensive. We've had a significant shift. It's a generation shift, not only the way we used to do business, but also the way the network configuration is moved to from centralized network to decentralized network. And one big issue for any operator and any people in the ecosystem that are service providers is the total cost of ownership versus the commercial exploitation they have. So let me ask Faisal this. Faisal, network automation is also expected to lower the total cost of ownership, right, for CSPs. But are there any benchmarks on the kind of savings and efficiencies that one can expect from this automation?
Yeah, thank you, Shobhit. And I think if we take a little bit of how I want to answer this question is to zoom out on the situation and the need for automation. It's actually a TCO improvement is one of the things, but it goes beyond that to touch the main 5 operational objectives, from lowering the cost, which is very important, to the quality of experience, to the speed, to the reliability, to the flexibility. And that is not something that operators or CSPs wants to have just to improve their financial situation. It's a necessity. It's the necessity of the market, and the type of the verticals they are gonna get into will actually mandate the use of automation. Today, this CSPs in the era of the 5G will be involved more in our society, will be part of our retail business, part of our health and care, oil and gas, media and communication. They are going to power up a lot of verticals, and that touches our society and our human, basically life equality much more than what it used to be. So automation is imperative from that perspective. Now coming back to the TCO. If you see basically TCO improvement is quite evident already. It has happened to a certain extent. And why I'm saying that? If you look at the past 3 to 5 years, you will see that EBITDA of the CSPs has actually improved. In reality, CSPs has shown a lot of resilience for the COVID situation. In fact, the revenue has not grown as much. Some of it worldwide, if I look at the statistics, is mostly flattish. And the EBITDA has improved at the same time, which shows actually some interesting trend. And when we go back at that trend and look at it, it's actually driven by lower CapEx and OpEx. Now, how this has been achieved? Of course, it's multiple factors, but it mainly goes back to the CSPs adopting smart technical network strategies as well as financial models. Those strategies and financial models has primarily pushed more CapEx into OpEx. I would give a lot of credit to the CSPs seeing the convergence of fiber deployment, 5G deployment coming up, and spectrum purchasing, which is such a big surge in their CapEx, and they got alerted and they started shifting a lot of their expenditure into the OpEx. Now, of course, that also has imposed another challenge on them, that the OpEx bill has been going up. So they also counter that by automation. So what some of these trends, what I have seen happening in the market first is basically the shift of the towers ownership towards the towers companies, active RAN sharing, passive RAN sharing, that has lowered their CapEx investment in acquiring new sites and moved everything to become more OpEx. Then the adoption of cloudification, and that goes to the solutions, to the infrastructure. I mean, there is a big wave coming our way, which is the Open RAN. And that is something actually we all excited about. I mean, some of us here on the stage are basically instrumental in making that happen. And that is gonna move more and more towards the OpEx. Now, also adoption of software as a service. You know, if you look at the average huge software deals closed in the industry in the past 3 years, they are coming down because it's actually moving to become software as a service, subscription. So to counter now the huge OpEx increase, automation has been deployed. I'm not saying that automation has reached to where it has to be, but we definitely have seen a lot of digital transformation RFPs. There is, I don't recall any pioneer or tier 1 or even tier 2 CSP who has not put an RFP with the name digital transformation. And what is the essence of that is actually automation. That automation, whether it's a micro level automation, let's say limited scale automation siloed within certain infrastructure, or a little bit macro and holistic level, where these requests for proposals were to cover the entire operation end to end from infrastructure perspective, but also from the ecosystem and complementary solution which makes this infrastructure work. So this has basically achieved to a certain extent what we are looking for, but there is much more to come. It's actually now going to a new stage, a new era, where speaking about proprietary hardware or hardware-centric, or speaking about proprietary interfaces is not so welcomed in the CSPs. You have to be open, you need to have your API interfaces, and there is 3 choices for any player in this market, either to get eliminated, to get integrated, or to get unified. So those consolidators who are coming into the operations of the CSPs are always offering a unification of 3-4 systems together, eliminating others, and an open architecture and interface where they basically join hands with the rest of the industry in order to achieve the goal of automation. And that is gonna basically show more results along the way. Now, to your question about what is the benchmark of the TCO improvement? I believe there is no one standard, because some operations were basically running with very relaxed, let's say, not so efficient operations. Those guys, according to the analysts, can realize up to 35% of savings. While others who has been smart in running their operations, where countries, the human resources are not so expensive, because automation addressed that mainly, they will see probably no less than 25% also savings on that. So that basically is something is gonna continue to happen. And I think the next most disruptive trend is going to be basically the Open RAN, which will even automate that further, and we are looking forward for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Faisal. I think what you said at the end, you know, at least from my perspective, I don't know whether the audience picked that, is very relevant. In a time when there's so much change, you cannot say any benchmark will be absolute. They are bound to change, they're bound to be dynamic. What was relevant 2 years back in terms of when 5G, or let's say 5 years back when actually 5G was introduced in the networks globally, that benchmark has come down quite significantly today, right? And this is going to be a moving topic every now and then. And I think it's going to be very important for us to keep tab. You know, it's never a best. Best is also relative. It's always a better situation, right? So thank you so much for that. Let me shift on to Bejoy. Bejoy, with increased payloads, you know, there is going to be significant need for automated provisioning and orchestration of the network. Can you share some examples of how some of the cloud native functions will actually help achieve that?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I think panels covered a lot of different areas, so I'll try to touch on the aspects that's specific to the question. As all of you know, the market dynamics are evolving. If we look at 5G, it's actually aiming to solve a lot of new business problems. So if you look at use case that Mr. Gupta announced earlier, which was the traffic management using a radio intelligent controller. So here you could do per UE level traffic steering as an example, which is again tied back to an Open RAN-based architecture. There are other use cases in the future that would be more applicable. Take network slicing, or quality of service experience, be it for the enterprise or consumer, being optimized further. And as we look at these networks, trying to deliver on the mission-critical services, you cannot really scale this without automation virtualization. So that becomes a foundational element to deliver on these new services. And the other aspect that was covered earlier as well is with 5G, you're not just serving smartphones, you're not just serving humans. It goes much beyond humans and smartphones to trillions of devices and serving non-humans, which means that you have a diverse set of applications which generate very different set of requirements. And to manage such a network, you cannot be reactive. It needs to be a proactive network management. So those two foundational elements then drive the requirements towards the automated workloads, which is things like CI/CD, continuous integration, development, DevOps, orchestration, application definition that could be done in a way that you could orchestrate these workloads when you're deploying this in your network. CI/CD, for example, allows you to where operators previously, I'm sure when before Geo started, the traditional operators all used to wait for the maintenance windows before you rolled out new features. With CI/CD and rolling upgrades, canary upgrades kind of scenario, the whole objective is that you could do this even during daytime without waiting for a maintenance window, which may happen once every 2 weeks. So that's one use case there. The other aspects to it being cloud nativeness, which is allowing you to disaggregate the hardware and software. And by getting most of your workloads into a software-based architecture, what that allows you to do is get to common tool sets. So typically one of the major challenges in operating a network is you've got a set of tools for running the RAN network, another set of tools for running the operation of the core. And what we see, especially with workloads moving towards Open RAN, disaggregated virtual RAN solutions, is at least functions such as onboarding, lifecycle management, scaling, which are very basic operational items. If you could roll that onto a common set of tools to manage the network, that begins the initial round to realizing the benefits of cloud-native deployments. And many of the aspects that were covered earlier around AI drives back to having workloads with data that's centrally pooled. So observability of that data into common data lakes, you cannot get to that such an architecture unless these workloads are in a cloud-native architecture. So that also becomes very critical. And when we look at a few examples of what's happened in the industry today outside of the initial OpenStack-based deployments, which came with a lot of promise, but in reality did not really deliver. And now the whole industry is shifting towards containerized CNF workloads, which at least the open source community there has built enough tools around through either the CNCF efforts or others to utilize these tools which are available for automation, monitoring, but that can be leveraged by operators as well, which lends a big upper hand in terms of realizing these gains. So take combined core for data, the packet core, which at least in the specs is defined as a services-based architecture, which means that many of these open source tools for running and managing a network, hardened versions of it could now be leveraged by operators. And specifically with Open RAN, it allows you to disaggregate the network. If we take Dish as an example, where today they're close to 6,000 sites live, at peak time, we were enabling up to 300 sites a night. So previously, where the site rollout after the physical build-out is done, because there's a lot of manual intervention involved, used to take 2 to 3 days. Now you're talking a couple of hours in which you're bringing up and enabling hundreds of sites. And that sort of workload automation is not possible without these workloads themselves being cloud native, which also lends to another point that when you run these workloads in different cloud environments, be it the operator network or be in a public cloud environment like Dish running on AWS or Deutsche Telecom running on Google Cloud, in all these setups, the key is these workloads being able to integrate and use the automation tools that are natively available in the setup that it's running. So if you're running in AWS, leverage the AWS tools. If you're running in the operator prem, leverage the tools that's within the open source community as a good example. So, and then looking beyond what's achieved today into the future, when we look at 5G and the varied use cases that 5G will support, there are many different verticals in which this could be leveraged. So there's example given earlier around customer experience being one of the key items. To get to that better customer experience, either through chatbots or better AI-driven algorithms, you need to have this data that's centrally pooled in a common data lake, so you can mine this data using AI/ML workflow. So retail is one very good sector. 5G will, of course, open the opportunity in industrial sector for higher quality, better optimization of these workloads, and very importantly in healthcare, because if you have to meet the service level agreements that 5G is promising, you need the networks to be scaled out if needed. So say, for example, there's an ambulance service where you need to deliver higher bandwidth. You need to be able to prioritize the user for that specific use case and deliver on that higher bandwidth, which may entail you actually scaling up your network. And if you're running within ASIC-based solutions for the RAN or running in custom boxes for the packet core, that sort of scalability is not possible, which means that you cannot deliver on these newer use cases. So this whole transition from closed boxes to OpenStack to now to containerized workloads, which is happening for different workloads at different stages on the operator network, that journey will continue. We see that at least for the next 2 to 3 years, as operators switch to standalone networks, as an example, it becomes a very good driver to launch some of these new use cases, where you could actually leverage a lot of these automation tools as well. So we look forward to working with the operator and the vendor community to drive many of these adoptions into the future.
Thanks, Bejoy. Actually, I wouldn't say you stole my thunder, but I definitely wanted to ask that question to Mr. Gupta to say that, can you just give an example of how it used to be earlier and how it is today? Very clearly said that, earlier, anything you wanted to modify at the site level or a core network or downstream level, you actually needed a physical presence, which today, sitting wherever you are, because of you using cloud and decentralized networks, you can actually switch the prioritization and the load capacity of the network. So that's a very good example, and especially for emergency services. In fact, for everyone's, this just opening up what we were talking in pre-session, had this not been, 4G is equally there, obviously 5G will elevate our experience, but had 4G not been there during the pandemic, it would have been very, very difficult for us to actually even function. Basic stuff, right? All of our networks at the office level, it's very simple to just blame an operator, but just imagine a network which used to be bearing 55-60% of the data load on the enterprise core suddenly shifted to work from home, which meant that all of your or most of your home located connectivity actually bore the brunt of that data transmission. And all of the networks or most of the core networks, the downstream connectivity had to be reconfigured to manage that kind of workload coming through, right? And it was more or less seamlessly done. I've had number of conversations with so many of the leaders, right? Whether they be people who are working in software, like the likes of Infosys, TCS, where they actually allowed most of their people working from home. It wouldn't have been possible. So this is just one clear example, and I think with 5G, as we get used to far more usage of data, far better speeds, this is going to be very, very important for switching.
Yeah,
so Anurag, if I may switch. Yeah, please
in fact,
add.
I just wanted to add here, if you really look at the whole provisioning and the orchestration and the OSS BSS side, from a strategic perspective, what 5G is bringing is a lot of possibilities. A lot of focus around enterprise, revenues coming in, and of course, a lot of complexities around, geographically distributed network, edge computings and all. Slicing in itself is going to be very, very complicated, but at least predictable. So I think from a strategy perspective, the operator, the way they are looking at is not about buying a provisioning system or upgrading that, rather looking at an ecosystem which brings openness, because tomorrow you don't know whether my healthcare is going to be bringing more revenues for me or maybe a agribusiness, right? So an ecosystem which is open, which is sort of an open API driven, following certain ecosystems like the TM Forum have developed, ODA and all, is going to be really, really critical for any operator to think for the next 10 years plan. That's very important aspect.
And I think from that point of view, we coming late in this system in terms of 5G launch is also a blessing, right? Because they always see pros and cons, whether you're first off the block or among the later of the block. You can actually learn from the mistakes or the experiments of what people have done worldwide, right? So while this debate is and will continue whether we were in the right time, I think it's a never die situation. We are well in time, and I think the need is now there for the hour to actually, for the people to adopt it, for the operators to go through with it, and therefore we'll see. But Anurag, let me just come back to you. You know, we've been talking about what it will do and how it will do. But how about reflecting on what are the key challenges? Because I think they still remain, and they will always remain. There will always be challenge around regulation. There will always be challenge around customer experience. There will always be challenge around operators, the ecosystem, people who are suppliers, the OEMs, how the maintenance happens. I guess the ecosystem is very diverse. It's very complex. What do you think are the key challenges that you're going to see the industry will face?
Uh, Good morning, everyone. I think I just jumped in. Was trying to add something, but yeah, see, from my perspective, the challenges which I see is the legacy which CSPs are carrying forward. I think it's a legacy of 40 years, which is and sort of an inertia of incumbency. That is I would say the most critical inhibiting factor in terms of bringing the whole automation piece into the ecosystem. I mean, if you look at it traditionally, the way applications has been developed is you create an application, bringing an EMS on top of that, and trying to do some sort of a scripting to bring automation. That was the mindset of a typical CSP over the years, right? So that's one aspect. And then if you really look at it, the way optimizations has been done was around that you're trying to optimize certain business processes, right? So what CSPs are struggling with, there has been a lot of silos of automations which has been created in the whole ecosystem. And I think that's really huge because there are so many applications around the whole ecosystem. Contrary, if you really look at the other companies like the web scale companies, what they have done is they have done something in 10 years, achieving the closed loop automation. CSPs has not achieved so far, right? And I think there's a fundamental shift, there's a radical shift which at least the CSP now started looking at it, which is cloud first approach, right? If you look at the whole web scale companies model, what they have done is they have created a sort of a foundation which is enabling multi-cloud environment, you know, as an underneath layer, putting up a lot of automation around it, which is Kubernetes, containerized, you know, microservices-based approach. So you are practically creating as a foundation an automation framework, and then the application comes next, right? So that fundamental change in terms of approach has to happen if you really want to achieve that closed loop automation in a real sense. It's a long process. It's not going to happen because, as I said, it's a legacy for 40 years. It's not about just the application changing, it's about the mindset of people changing because you're trying to, every time trying to find shortcuts, trying to create something to achieve, you know, the quick results. But I think that's the strategic direction industry have taken. All those transformations, I believe, gonna take times, few years, but I think that's, the good part is that's the direction I see which is now prevailing. I mean, my experience whenever I'm talking to the CSPs, the CIOs, I think overall this is what they're trying to achieve.
I think well said. More than any regulation, any rules, objectives, etc., I think the dynamic cultural change is going to be probably the most important. Sorry, Mr. Gupta, you were wanting to say something. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think slightly I would differ. We have no legacy, right, and no incumbency. But what I would say important, even if you do wonders in the network side, still you may not be able to deliver the best experience. So what is important? The operators needs to know device, applications, CDNs, and the latency. If all that put together is not taken into account, then the delivery of experience on, especially on the ultra reliable and low latency, will be very, very challenging. Therefore, you know, all this entire ecosystem of everything in the value chain is going to be playing a very, very vital role. So telemetry of each and everything, we need to know even what features are being supported by which device. Every device can have different experience in the same network, right? That's number one. The second part is like this multi-cloud thing and containerized functions are posing their own challenges. So the scale in scale out has been talked for a very long time, but in private clouds it is very, very difficult to achieve. So what do we need to do? We need to have best suited network functions for a particular application is something is the key for operators. So in a nutshell, if I summarize, we have gone ahead much forward path in terms of automation as far as the experience is concerned. But there is a lot more to be done. It's a continuous journey. When we talk about CI/CD, it's CI/CD and CA. Continuous automation has to happen based upon the customer needs. Network slicing is going to bring hell lot of requirements, use cases. As every use case is going to bring newer requirements. Now, how do you give from the same network, even within the same slice, for different enterprise customers and retail customer, the experience which suits to that customer and meets that customer requirement is going to be the best outcome which we can achieve through network automation, zero touch, I would say, operations.
Too many cogs in the wheel, Mr. Gupta rightly said. Each link in the chain can be the downfall or the better part. So, yes, networks can be ready, but if your device is not that good, your experience will be limited. So, I guess that's a very good universal one. Bejoy, what would be your concluding remarks on this? I think if I may just, we've talked about from the service provider side, from the operator side, if you can just focus a little more on the customer side, what the customer would expect. I know in very basic language, it's better speed, a lot more download, etc. But what is it that you see that the customer needs to orient themselves to make sure they get the best 5G experience?
So if we break down the customer experience to consumers versus enterprise, I think from a monetization perspective, operators are targeting the enterprise market. And to them, today, a lot of the transition has happened to an SD-WAN kind of architecture where you're trying to minimize the amount of equipment that's at the enterprise location. It's mostly a managed service offering, so be it for firewall services or just vRouter kind of services. In the future, when we talk about network slicing or network as a service hosted offering, to them, it's removing the headache of managing the day-to-day network. So the automation tools being predictive, one factor of success to them would be how predictable is their budget allocation. The second could be how much of the predictive or reactive kind of troubleshooting that's managed by the hosted provider takes away on their expenses of managing the network. And of course, the total cost of ownership. So from an enterprise perspective, it's going to depend on the service that's being offered to the enterprise, what the operator is selling to them, and how is that being managed, and what's the cost of managing that network. To the consumer, today is mostly about high-speed bandwidth, and maybe there are a few use cases that's launched with cloud gaming, and that's about it. Maybe there are demos being done of hologram calling and others, but true monetization, consumers, other than experiencing a higher bandwidth, has not really happened. Even operators who have looked to charge a higher dollars have backed out of it. When Verizon first launched 5G, they increased their the price plan by $10, and a month later they had to back up because T-Mobile started giving it away for free. So then it became, how do I get them to the higher bucket plan? So today I'm on a $40 plan that gives me X Gbps. I want to get to an unlimited plan, and that will not have a cap on the amount of data usage. So to them, today it's about that, but the future is going to be where, as Mr. Gupta just alluded to, network segments that are per device, per user specific. So for example, if I walk into a museum or just this location, if I could pick up an AR/VR glass and get an experience that's suited to me with higher bandwidth, lower latency, just during the time that I'm here, and being able to charge for that in real time. So having the backend transformation also happen at the operator side. So the traditional BSS systems today will just spin out a bill at the end of the month. But for this sort of an experience where it's per user driven, per device driven, per scenario driven, you need to have the backends also adapt to being able to charge for these. Otherwise, you could give a great experience, but you cannot monetize on it. So we see that transition also happen from a consumer perspective as the networks become more mature, more automated, virtualized, scalable, and start to reap the benefits of cloudification. The consumer would start to get many of these newer use cases, be it an enhanced AR/VR experience, cloud gaming, or just much more prioritized user experience. And then for specific verticals, be it healthcare and others, you could have a ton of new use cases being implemented.
Oh, thank you, Bejoy. In fact, just a very quick observation. I remember when we were exposed to the privatized networks, initially the choice was always which network you want to choose. Then it went on or moved on to the devices that you are actually using, which network is providing or supporting that device. Now it is clearly moving into the experience perspective where a person wants to choose the network where the experience has been best. So that's what's going to really go back into what the networks finally do. So thank you. Mr. Dey, what do you think, sir?
Great conversation, and we covered a lot of aspects, but one thing we missed out, which is very important, which we should not lose track of as we think about how to automate the network, how we build autonomous network, is on security. End-to-end security is very important, covering the device, the entire network, the RAN, the transport, the core, the OSS, BSS, the applications, the data. So I think that also should be a primary objective as we try to automate our networks. Right? So just some concluding thoughts here. I think 5G, all of us agree, is complex to operate. There are multiple frequency bands, multiple deployment options. So the question is, how do we abstract the complexity and simplify the network so that we are able to deliver a real user experience, whether it is to the consumers and to the enterprise. And AI ML based approach to make the network fully autonomous, fully cognitive and intent based will go a long way in achieving the objectives of what 5G was originally supposed to do. And while technology is important, whether we are talking about big data, AI, ML, one should not lose track of that it is a transformation and requires cultural change, requires a strong organization change management to be able to deliver the benefits of automation.
Thanks, sir. Faisal, your concluding.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's very exciting to see the consensus around the automation and the very clear direction in the industry towards going to the automation. Now, I think that we still going to learn. Now, automation is the trend. And of course, the trend is everybody's a friend. So everyone wants to be part of that trend. Everybody wants to support it. But I see that we are going to go through a learning curve, because what we see now is the tip of the iceberg. When we get to the verticals more, we will be surprised with the new challenges, which is imposing on us. There will be a pull and push forces. Now the CSPs are going and pushing certain automation on industries which are not coming proactively. Others are coming proactively and pulling. And we are going to discover together, if you take only the health and care vertical again, that has a lot of vertical specific knowledge that CSPs are not experts in. And that is where CSPs has to reshape their organization to become less vertical agnostic, more vertical specific. What we see a lot of groups and CSPs in the industry has changed the name of their operation. Stop calling them CSPs, they call themselves DSPs. And they are localizing content, specializing in verticals, and that is where telecommunication and telco industry is going to transform completely to very specific and service-aware industry.
Thank you, Faisal. I know we are just about running out of time, but if there is any one or two questions from the audience, anyone would like to ask? Otherwise, I can close the panel. Yeah, please. And if you can just state your name, please. Yeah, I'll come to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Vineet Tiwari. I'm from Shri Balaji University, Pune. And I want to ask the Mr. Gupta, sir, when we talk about the costing, since India has the more population now in middle or a lower level income generation, basically middle income. We are middle, people are more. The large part of population is comprises of middle population. So the Geo is using means something different strategy. Like when the Geo was launched, there was the free subscriptions and any new strategy the Geo is using for the cost cutting or the creating the consumer base among the Indian population.
Yeah, great question. So I think our strategy from day one has been to benefit the customer and give the best experience. How we have done it, we all know, starting from our infrastructure, deployment design, many things have been done in a very innovative way. Starting, our sites were not having any diesel generators. We used lithium-ion batteries, which provides much better, backup and very fast charging. So that is one of the examples. We designed our own towers. We have put our own fiber. So everything, from infrastructure to the software, all that put together, and the volume which we have played on has actually given us power to empower our customers to use the services at the most affordable rate. And today, after Geo launch, 6 years almost, we have completed commercial operations. We are continuing to be the most affordable, I would say, country in terms of the data usage. I know people, globally, he is sitting next to me. The monthly, subscription which these people have in other countries is $30, $40, $50, and here it is just 200 rupees or 250 rupees, is just $2.50. So already we are 1/10 of the whole world, and the entire, I would say, end-to-end value chain which we have played on has actually given us, power to achieve that kind of efficiency with the scale.
The beauty we have in our country is scale, right? So it's the fastest. I think you're probably the fastest to 200, then 300, then 400, right?
Yeah, starting with 100 million, and the fastest we were to migrate from free to paid. That was never achieved. Because generally people give free and then people don't migrate. That was not the case with us, because the kind of experience which we gave, everyone came back to us.
So happiness has a quotient. I understand that. Sorry, someone at the back was asking. Yes, the one in the red shirt, please. Sorry, I'm not branding you as red shirt, but...
No worries. Yeah, I'm Nikhil Kulkarni from VMware. Mr. Bejoy just spoke of open source community support for operators. And in the current scenario, there are some domains that are dominated by proprietary products and a few others by the community source projects. So going forward with the Open RAN coming into play, what are the key aspects or domains in the 5G architecture that the upcoming open source projects could really benefit from or could have opportunities to enter the space?
Thank you for the question specifically, because it's about Open RAN. It's one topic which is very near and dear to Mavenir, since we founded the technology around 6 years ago and are the leader in it. When it comes to Open RAN, just for folks who are not familiar with it, and because there's a lot of confusion on the definition of Open RAN, let me just set the context for that. So Open RAN really is about mixing and matching the radio with the baseband. So that's one key aspect. The other aspect, as Mr. Gupta alluded to, is the intelligence that it brings, which is around the automation piece through a radio intelligent controller, be it the non-real-time RIC or the near real-time RIC. So from Open RAN perspective, you could look at the open source activities that are happening. One of the main areas is in the non-real-time RIC, which is called the SMO, the Service Management and Orchestration space. Initially, it started with the ONAP activity that AT&T had started. It blew up into a gigantic project which nobody could manage. But the good thing is with ORAN and the workgroup activity that's happening there, a lot of the orchestration workflow aspects can now be managed using open source activity within the SMO. And I know there are many vendors, including VMware with the TCA product and others, who are entering into the space of orchestration, specifically the non-real-time RIC, which adds to a lot of AI/ML workflows, but it's non-real-time. The other aspect where we see not so much open source community, but more of the vendors who came from the open source community but are now selling products as independent vendors is the applications, what's called the XApps and RApps, that's driven to the near real-time RIC. Now, in that architecture, unless it's a vendor like Mavenir who's fully adherent to the Open RAN specs, you cannot manage the network to get the experience of beamforming that was mentioned earlier, or the experience around traffic steering that I mentioned, unless it's a truly open network. So I'll give an example, a couple of companies that are working in this space. This Cohere, which is an independent company that's developed application, and they started as an open source company as well. They developed an application which is now capable of multiplying the spectral efficiency for multi-user MIMO scenarios. So, and they've trialed it many times in Vodafone and other accounts where on a multi-user MIMO you get up to 2 to 4 times capacity. There are other companies like TerraSpatial that's come up that's doing multi-user MIMO beamforming gains up to 10x times. So these are still in the early stages. So I would summarize from the open source community efforts around Open RAN, the two main areas that we see today, a lot of focus from open source communities. One is around the orchestration, non-real-time RIC SMO, and the second piece is around this whole applications in the near real-time RIC, which is spinning up as independent companies. But 2 to 3 years down the road, what I would see is more of the open silicon play. So how would you interface with open silicon, which comes from Marvell or Qualcomm or NVIDIA and others? Because one aspect that we did not discuss in the panel is, if you look into the future for 5G, and if you're truly going to run into an enterprise location, if you have to scale and use the infrastructure that's at the enterprise location, be it a GPU that comes from NVIDIA, today a traditional NEP solution from, I don't want to put names, it's an ASIC-based solution, which means it's purpose-built for one application. You cannot leverage connectivity on that same application like a GPU in that sort of an architecture. So I see the abstraction layer to interface with these open silicon as another area where the open source community could actually help evolve this industry. But that's a little further out because you need to see the initial rollout take in mass scale, and hopefully carriers in India, be it Airtel, Jio, and others, can help us push the envelope here in getting Open RAN to that large scale so we could drive the open source community also towards more of these advanced areas that we see in the future.
Thanks, Bejoy. Yes, yes.
Yeah, just, to your question, I just want to give a specific example. So, we have our own 88R macro RU that is based on Open RAN standards. And we have been able to integrate with the SMO from Anna Networks. Now, Anna Networks has a SMO which is open source based. And we were able to do it quickly within, maybe less than 2 weeks of effort. And the reason why we were able to do it, because it is based on open standards. So definitely open standards, very important for the success of 5G and beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Dey. So with that, I'd really like to express a big thank you to all of the panelists who've actually invested the time to take us through and give us insights on how and what automated networks will look like, what are the challenges, how you expect things to move forward. I just request each of you to accept a small memento from the organization, and with the big thanks to enlightening us with your thoughts. Thank you so much.